What would you do if a wrong number rang at 2 in the morning and it changed 3 lives forever? Stay with me through this story. You won't forget it. And before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more stories like this. The storm had been crawling over Ravenfield all night, its rhythm steady against the windows of Nolan Reyes's modest home. The world felt unnaturally still, the kind of stillness that usually belongs to sorrow. He should have been asleep hours ago, but Benji had woken again, shaken by another nightmare. It had taken warm milk, a blanket fresh from the dryer, and Nolan's quiet humming of an old tune to coax his son back into slumber. Now the boy lay curled beneath his rocket ship blanket, one small fist still holding tight to a stuffed bear, as if it were the last anchor in a restless sea. Nolan stood in the doorway for a long moment, letting the soft rise and fall of his son's breathing remind him why he endured the long shifts, the empty fridge, and the aching loneliness that came once the lights were out. He turned back toward the kitchen, poured the dregs of yesterday's coffee into his mug, and braced himself for a few more hours awake. His hands were raw from warehouse work, his back sore, but at least in this quiet, he could breathe. That's when the phone rang. The sound cut sharply against the hush of the storm. Unknown caller. Nolan frowned, thumb hovering over the screen. At this hour, every instinct told him to let it ring out. Nothing good ever waits at 2 in the morning. And yet, against reason, he answered. "Hello," he said, voice low. For a heartbeat, there was only static and the storm. Then a woman's voice, broken and trembling, came through. "Please don't hang up. Just come. 48 Briar Hollow Road. I can't breathe." The line went dead before he could respond. Nolan stood frozen, staring at the phone as if it might explain itself. It could have been a prank, a wrong number. The logical choice, the safe choice, was to put the phone down, crawl back into bed, and forget the call ever happened. He thought of Benji sleeping peacefully in the next room, and every part of him screamed to stay home. But something about that voice clung to him. It wasn't staged. It wasn't attention-seeking. It was raw, desperate, real. Minutes later, Nolan found himself outside in the rain, jacket pulled tight, his old pickup coughing to life. Headlights cut through the sheets of water as he turned onto the road leading north. His rational mind listed every reason this was reckless. He didn't know who she was or what waited for him at Briar Hollow. It could be a mistake, even a danger, and yet his hand stayed steady on the wheel. The storm swallowed the truck, rain hammering harder as he climbed into the wooded hills above town. Each curve in the road felt like a question he couldn't yet answer. But the truth was simple. When someone calls out into the darkness, sometimes you don't weigh the risks. Sometimes you just go. And so Nolan drove deeper into the storm, toward a stranger's broken voice, toward Briar Hollow Road, unaware that this night and this choice would change 3 lives forever. The road wound higher into Ravenfield's wooded hills, where the storm turned the night into something feral. Branches bowed under the weight of water. Headlights swept across ivy-covered gates and crumbling stone walls, ghosts of another century. Nolan's grip tightened on the wheel as the GPS announced the end of his route. On the left, half hidden under vines, a rusted mailbox leaned against the wind, 48 Briar Hollow Road. No gate, just a long, narrow drive, rising like a tunnel between oaks. The truck groaned as he guided it uphill. His heart pounded harder with each bend. He should turn back, he told himself. Go home to Benji. But the voice replayed in his head, ragged, fractured, and he pressed on. At the top of the hill, the mansion appeared, or what was left of it. Briar Hollow stood like a memory refusing to fade. Moss streaked its stone walls, shutters sagged, paint long surrendered to rain and rot. Yet the porch light glowed steady against the storm, as though someone inside was waiting. Nolan killed the engine and stepped out. The rain hit him in sheets, soaking his jacket before he reached the steps. He lifted the tarnished brass knocker, hesitated, then let it fall. A hollow sound echoed into the house. For a breath, nothing. Then the door creaked open. She stood there, barefoot, hem of her silk nightgown heavy with rain, hair clinging dark to her face. Her eyes were rimmed red, not with sleep, but with something deeper. A crystal glass trembled in her hand, amber liquid sloshing dangerously. For a moment she looked at him as if she recognized him, or wished she hadn't. "You're not him," she whispered. Nolan shook his head gently. No, I got a call. This address, a woman in distress. Her gaze flickered past him into the storm. The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor. She swayed, knees buckling, and Nolan lunged forward, catching her before she hit the ground. Her body was light, trembling. He guided her inside, past the shards of crystal, into a living room that smelled faintly of dust and old smoke. The room bore the grandeur of another life, an ornate fireplace, cold and dark, heavy curtains sagging, portraits staring down from cracked frames. Nolan eased her onto a tufted couch, tugged a blanket from a nearby chair, and draped it over her shoulders. She shivered beneath it, though her eyes stayed lucid. I thought, she managed, voice paper thin. I thought I called my therapist. I must have hit the wrong number. Nolan crouched beside her. It's all right. You're not alone now. She blinked at him as if the words themselves were strange. Then she let out a breath that sounded like defeat. There's no one left to call. Her eyes weren't drunk, not really. They were too clear for that. This was grief, grief that hollowed rather than dulled. Nolan rose, found a bin of logs near the hearth, and struck a match. The fire sputtered, then caught, light pushing back years of cold as warmth filled the room. The storm softened outside, its anger spent. Nolan sat in a worn armchair nearby, watching her shoulders relax by inches beneath the blanket. She lifted the cup of tea he had managed to brew, holding it with both hands as though steadying herself. Do you always answer calls like that? She asked. After a long pause, he met her gaze, steady and calm. Didn't feel right not to. Something shifted in her eyes like the first crack in a wall long sealed. I'm Nadia Quinn, she said softly, and I haven't let a soul in this house for 4 years. The fire snapped, throwing sparks, and for the first time in years, Briar Hollow held not just silence, but the faint, fragile warmth of someone who chose to stay. The fire cracked softly, pushing back the damp chill that had lingered in the walls of Briar Hollow. Nadia sat curled on the end of the couch, the blanket gathered tight around her shoulders, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea Nolan had managed to find in a dusty cabinet. The steam touched her face, but her eyes were fixed on the flames as though the past might be written there. Nolan didn't press her. He had learned long ago with Benji that sometimes silence was its own kind of invitation. At last she spoke, her voice low, almost lost in the rhythm of the storm easing outside. It was supposed to be just another trip. Aspen, my parents, and my younger brother, Charlie. They flew ahead on the family's charter plane. I was meant to follow the next day. Her lips trembled. She swallowed hard. The weather turned. Their plane went down over Wyoming. No survivors. The words dropped like stones, heavy in the space between them. She stared into her tea, blinking slowly, as if she could still see their faces hovering above the rim. Everyone was sorry. For a while there were cards, flowers, and polite words. And then it stopped. People moved on. They always do. A bitter smile ghosted across her face, fleeting and fragile. But I didn't move on. I locked the gates. I stayed here 4 years now, just me and these walls. The firelight drew shadows along her cheekbones, making her look both younger and older all at once. She pulled the blanket tighter, as though it could shield her from the truth she had just spoken aloud. Nolan leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees, his calloused hands folded. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't offer empty comfort. He just nodded slowly, in that grounded way of a man who understood what it meant to carry something too heavy for words. Nadia's eyes flicked toward him, almost wary. And you? Why did you come? Why answer a call that wasn't meant for you? Nolan let out a breath. Because someone sounded like they didn't want to be alone, and I know what that feels like. His voice was steady, quiet, as if each word had been tested before it left his mouth. He didn't elaborate, not yet. But in the lines of his face, in the fatigue etched around his eyes, the truth hummed softly. The dawn crept slowly over Ravenfield, soft light pushing its way past the storm's retreat. For the first time in years, Briar Hollow looked less like a mausoleum and more like a house remembering it once held life. Nolan woke stiff in the armchair, the scent of smoke and old tea clinging to him. Across the room, Nadia had dozed upright on the velvet couch. The blanket slipped from her shoulder. Strands of dark hair tangled against her cheek. For a moment, he simply watched her breathing, steady, fragile, but alive. When she stirred, embarrassed, Nolan only offered a quiet smile. "You were tired," he said, and she looked down as though unused to anyone naming her needs with kindness. They moved together through the hushed corridors of the mansion. The storm had left streaks on the tall windows, but sunlight broke through in pale ribbons, landing on portraits that lined the walls. Elegant faces, generations of Quinns caught in oil and gilt. Nadia slowed in front of one, a boy of about 10 with mischievous eyes, a wolfish dog by his side. "My brother," she whispered. "Charlie. He used to make me laugh until I couldn't breathe." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't look away. Nolan studied the painting, then her face. "He looks like trouble," he said softly, and for the first time, she gave a faint smile that wasn't just politeness. They reached the conservatory at the end of the hall. Its glass roof and walls were streaked with grime, the air damp with the smell of old earth. Vines curled where they shouldn't. Pots lay broken, soil hardened with neglect. Yet light streamed through, catching on ferns still clinging to life. It was wild and untended, but not dead. Nadia stepped inside slowly, as though entering a memory she had locked away. "This was my favorite place," she murmured. "Before everything stopped, my mother believed beauty could fix anything. She built this conservatory as her sanctuary." Her hand brushed a planter rimmed with dust. "After the accident, I couldn't bear to touch it. I let it all wither, just like me." Nolan's gaze wandered across the room, the glass ceiling fractured but intact, the stubborn shoots pushing up through cracks. He turned back to her, his voice low, certain. "Doesn't look dead to me. Looks like something is waiting." Nadia blinked. "Waiting for what?" "For someone to start again," he said. "You could. We could plant from the beginning, see what grows." She looked at him sharply, as if surprised he could speak into the silence she had carried for 4 years. For a long beat, she said nothing. Then her shoulders loosened ever so slightly in the dusty light of the conservatory, among cracked pots and forgotten vines. A thread pulled taut between them, thin, uncertain, but real. Not love, not yet. Something smaller, a recognition, a promise that the house, like its mistress, might not be finished after all. And as they stepped back into the corridor, Nadia found herself glancing at Nolan, this weary single father who showed up for a stranger in the night. For the first time in years, the idea of starting again didn't sound impossible. It sounded like hope, fragile as glass but strong enough to catch the morning light. Saturday came dressed in pale sunlight, the kind that makes even broken glass look like it might shine again. Nolan's pickup rattled up the long drive, and this time, Benji sat beside him, nose pressed to the window. The boy's eyes widened at the first glimpse of Briar Hollow. "It looks like a castle," he whispered, voice hushed with awe. Nolan smiled but said nothing, letting his son's wonder fill the cab more than any words could. Nadia was waiting at the door, not in silk this time, but in jeans and rolled sleeves, gardening gloves tucked into her back pocket. The sight of her outside, in daylight, felt different, less haunted, more alive. She bent down slightly when Benji stepped from the truck. "You must be Benji," she said gently. "I've heard you're good at naming things." Benji's gaze flicked to his father, then back to her. He gave a small nod. "I like castles," he said softly. "Then you're going to love the greenhouse," Nadia replied with the faintest smile. Inside the conservatory, dust still lingered on the panes, but sunlight filtered through, catching on threads of ivy and stubborn ferns. Benji wandered between the planters, small fingers brushing moss, his mind already building worlds. He crouched by a cracked pot where green clung stubbornly to life. "Crawley green," he declared, serious as a scientist. "Not just moss, it's everyday magic." The words caught Nadia off guard. She stared at the boy, then burst into laughter, unrestrained, sudden, startling even to herself. The sound echoed off the glass, startling the birds outside. She covered her mouth, almost embarrassed. "I haven't laughed like that I can't even remember." Nolan, leaning against the old potting bench, caught her eye. "That's his specialty," he said. "Benji finds names where the rest of us just see weeds." The three of them set to work, not with fanfare, but with a quiet rhythm. Nolan lifted broken pots and cleared debris. Nadia brushed soil into neat piles. Benji darted between them, declaring grand discoveries: a spiky dragon vine, a leafy sea monster, a geranium he swore was a superhero in disguise. Each time Nadia laughed again, softer now, but real. Hours passed that way, hands dirty, knees smudged, clothes streaked with earth. Nolan paused once, watching the two of them kneeling side by side in the dirt. Nadia's hair had slipped from its tie, brushing her cheek. Benji was showing her how the moss felt like carpet if you pressed it gently. She listened as if his words mattered more than any boardroom once had. Something stirred in Nolan's chest. It wasn't grand, not even sharp. It was the quiet recognition of a moment that felt like family, not the kind defined by blood or papers, but by presence, by laughter filling a room that had forgotten the sound. As the afternoon light softened and dust floated golden in the air, Nadia leaned back on her heels, wiping soil from her hands. She looked at Nolan across the conservatory. "You were right," she said simply. "It's not dead. It was just waiting." Nolan's lips curved into a small, steady smile. Sometimes things just need someone to notice. In that glass house, once silent, now filled with names, laughter, and dirt under their fingernails, a fragile seed of belonging took root. And for the first time in years, Briar Hollow felt less like a relic of loss and more like a place where something new could grow. By the end of that weekend, the conservatory looked less like a graveyard of forgotten plants and more like the beginning of something alive. Dust still clung to the glass, but now light had a way of sneaking through, catching on leaves that bent toward the warmth. Nadia stood in the doorway as Nolan and Benji packed up their tools. Her hands clasped as though she were holding back words. Finally, she let them spill. "You don't have to go back to town every night," she said quietly. Her eyes moved from Nolan's weary frame to the boy clutching his stuffed bear against his dirt-streaked shirt. "There's a guest house at the edge of the property. It's small but warm enough once the fire's going. I thought maybe you and Benji could stay just for a while. Help me bring this place back." Nolan froze, the weight of her offer settling heavily. He had spent years avoiding what looked like handouts, determined that his son would grow up knowing dignity even when money was short. "That's kind," he said slowly, "but we're not looking for charity." Nadia shook her head, almost fiercely. "Not charity, purpose. This house has been silent too long. When you're here, it doesn't feel like a tomb anymore. If you stayed, it would be for both of us." He studied her, the way she spoke the words, not with pity, but with a fragile hope. His gaze shifted to Benji, who was already tugging at his sleeve. "Dad," the boy whispered, "can I have a garden bed here? Just mine?" Nolan felt the tug in his chest, strong and certain. He exhaled. "If we do this, it's with two conditions," he said, turning back to Nadia. "First, I share the costs, repairs, utilities, whatever it takes. I won't let Benji think we're taking without giving back. Second, Benji gets his own plot of earth, somewhere he can plant and grow without anyone telling him it's too small to matter." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Nadia smiled, a real smile that softened her whole face. "Shared responsibility," she said, "and a boy's garden. Deal." That weekend, the guest house came alive again. Stone walls still wore their ivy, but inside, Nolan mended hinges, cleared dust from windows, and coaxed the old wood stove into warmth. Benji darted from room to room, claiming corners with drawings taped to the walls, laughter echoing off beams that hadn't heard such a sound in years. In the garden, Nadia marked off a small square of earth with stones. "This one's yours," she told Benji. "Whatever you plant here, no rules apply." The boy knelt immediately, patting the soil like a friend. "This is where my dragon peppers will grow," he declared. That evening, as twilight washed over Briar Hollow, the three of them sat on the back steps of the guest house. Nolan sipped coffee from a chipped mug. Nadia cradled her tea. Benji leaned against his father's side, eyes heavy but content. Fireflies blinked over the grass, and for once the silence was not heavy. Nolan glanced at Nadia, then out at the land stretching wide and untamed. "Feels different," he murmured. "It is different," she replied, "because you stayed." In that moment, Nolan realized what his son already knew. They were no longer visitors here. They were part of something, messy, fragile, unfinished, but theirs. And for the first time in years, the idea of home didn't feel out of reach. It was right here, taking root under the Ravenfield sky. The first weeks in the guest house unfolded with surprising ease. Nolan patched leaking gutters, Nadia drew up lists of what to restore next, and Benji tended his tiny plot with the solemn devotion of a knight guarding treasure. For a time, it felt as though Briar Hollow had finally learned to breathe again. But storms have a way of testing what seems new. It began with a heaviness in the air, a stillness that made even the birds restless. By late afternoon, the sky dimmed, colors draining as if someone had pulled a curtain over the sun. Nolan looked up from the trellis he was mending and knew rain was coming. When it broke, it came fast and merciless, hammering the roofs until the whole estate shuddered. Inside the guest house, Benji's small body stiffened. The sound was different from the hum of city rain he knew. This was wild, relentless. He covered his ears, pacing tight circles. "It's too loud," he whispered, breath shallow. "It's not like home. I don't like it." Nolan crouched, grounding him with steady hands. "I know, buddy. It's just water on the roof. Think of it like a giant drum. The sky is just making music for us." Benji tried, lips trembling, but when thunder cracked, he flinched hard. Nolan pulled him close. "How about we head to the main house? Maybe it's quieter there." They dashed through the rain, soaked by the time Nadia opened the heavy door. She looked pale, sweater sleeves pulled tight around her wrists. The storm was not only in the sky, it was in her. Nolan read it in the way her eyes darted toward the windows, already bracing for something she couldn't control. Benji curled into the living room couch, clutching a blanket. Nadia sat beside him, stroking his hair, though her own hand shook. Nolan went to the kitchen, warmed milk with honey, and set it gently in front of her. She managed a nod of thanks. Then lightning split the night, thunder chasing close behind. Benji whimpered into the cushions. Nadia froze, her lips moving as if counting, but the rhythm faltered. Her chest rose too fast. She turned and hurried down the hall. Nolan waited until Benji's breathing steadied, then followed. He found her in the study, pressed against the bookcase, eyes wide in the dark. She didn't notice him at first, lost in the storm of memory. Nolan stepped close, voice calm. "Breathe with me. In, out, slow." She shook her head, tears spilling. "I thought I was past this. I thought I was okay." "Storms wake what we bury," Nolan said quietly. "That doesn't mean you're broken." Her knees gave way and she slid to the floor. "I should have been on that plane. If I had, maybe they'd still be here." He knelt beside her, steady as stone. "No, don't go there. Grief lies. It tells you that surviving was wrong. It wasn't. You didn't take them from the world. You lost them too." Her sobs broke open. "I promised my mother I'd take care of Charlie, and I wasn't there." "You were his sister, not his shield," Nolan said, his hand resting lightly on her arm. "Being alive isn't betrayal. It's the only way you can honor them now." The words sank in, slow as rain soaking earth. Her trembling eased, breath by breath. She found a rhythm again. When at last she lifted her gaze, she found his steady eyes in the dark, an anchor in the flood. Later, when they returned to the living room, Benji had drifted into sleep, small body curled beneath the throw, face calm once more. Nadia stood over him, whispering, "He trusted me, even when I froze." Nolan shook his head softly. "He trusted what he felt. That you care. That's enough." She reached out then, fingertips brushing his arm. "Thank you for staying." The storm raged on outside, but within Briar Hollow, something shifted. Trust, fragile but real, had taken root. And for the first time, all three knew they didn't have to weather storms alone. The air at Briar Hollow had only just begun to feel steady again after the storm. Days passed in a rhythm of quiet repairs, laughter from Benji's garden bed, and long evenings where the house no longer seemed to echo with emptiness. Then one morning, the sound of tires on gravel broke that peace. A sleek black BMW rolled up the drive like it owned the road. Nolan looked up from the soil he was turning, muscles tensing. Out stepped a man in a tailored jacket, polished shoes untouched by mud. Sebastian Voss carried himself with the effortless arrogance of someone who had never once questioned whether he belonged. He glanced at Nolan, dismissive. "So you're the gardener?" he said flatly before turning his eyes to the house. Nadia emerged from the conservatory, gloves still on, hair loose from her braid, a smear of earth across her cheek. Sebastian's brows lifted. Nadia Quinn, an heiress reduced to dirt under her fingernails. Never thought I'd see the day. His smile was sharp, cruel. You could be in Paris, New York, but instead you're wasting away here with... His gaze flicked to Nolan. This. For a beat, silence held. The old Nadia might have shrunk back, hidden behind silence or practiced charm, but not now. Her voice was firm, clear. You're right about one thing, Sebastian. I could be anywhere, and I was for years, surrounded by marble walls, the right people, the right parties. I was miserable. She pulled her gloves off, letting them fall. I don't need yachts or boardrooms. I need people who stay, people who show up when it storms. Sebastian's smile faltered, his charm useless against the weight of her words. He scoffed, but it rang hollow. Suit yourself, he muttered, retreating to his car. Gravel spat as the BMW disappeared down the drive. The air seemed lighter without him. But inside the guest house, another storm was brewing. Benji sat on the floor of his room, small hands clutching a red pencil, his face pinched, anxious to a child who had lost before. Sebastian's cruel words carried a shadow. What if grown-ups leave again? That evening, Nolan found the note on the kitchen table, written in Benji's uneven scrawl. Dear Miss Nadia, I don't know if you're sad because of the storm or because of that man, but if you are, I think you're still brave. And if you want, you can borrow my red pencil. It helps me when I feel mad or gray. Nolan read it twice, his chest tightening. He folded it carefully, handed it to Nadia later that night. She opened it slowly, eyes moving over each crooked letter. For a moment she said nothing, then pressed the note to her chest. Her voice was thick but steady. He sees people, even when they try to hide. She looked at Nolan, then at Benji, asleep on the couch, blankets sliding from his shoulders. Quietly, she tucked the red pencil into her own pocket. The next morning, she knelt in front of Benji, holding it out. You gave me this when I needed it, she said softly. And I want you to know something. I'm not going anywhere. Not when it rains, not when people like Sebastian try to drag me back. I stay because you're worth staying for. Benji blinked, then leaned into her with the kind of trust only a child can give. Nolan watched from the doorway, a lump in his throat. The mansion that once held only grief now held something far more defiant, the courage to choose the present over the ghosts of the past. The days after Sebastian's visit carried a new kind of resolve. The insult he had thrown at her, meant to diminish, had instead crystallized something inside Nadia. She wasn't simply reclaiming Briar Hollow for herself. She was shaping it into something that could matter beyond her grief. One afternoon, she led Nolan and Benji into the conservatory, now cleared enough for sunlight to scatter across the stone floor. She set a notebook on the bench, pages already marked with sketches and scribbled notes. Her eyes glowed with purpose. I've been thinking, she began, hesitating only for a breath. This house has been a tomb for too long, but it doesn't have to stay that way. What if we opened it, not just the greenhouse, but all of it, as a place for children and parents who need somewhere safe, a space for art, for gardening, for quiet when the world feels too loud, a center for growing things, not just plants, but people. The words hung in the air. Nolan studied her face, seeing not the fragile recluse he'd met that stormy night, but a woman stepping into herself again. You mean like a community program? He asked. Exactly, Nadia said. A place where a boy like Benji doesn't feel strange for needing silence, where a father doesn't feel alone trying to hold it all together. Her voice wavered, but only with conviction. We could call it the Briar Hollow Center for Growing Things. Benji's eyes lit up instantly. Can I be in charge of naming the plants? Nadia laughed, reaching to ruffle his hair. More than that, you'll be our very first junior garden guide. The title landed like a crown. Benji puffed his chest with pride, already imagining badges and tours. Nolan felt his throat tighten at the sight. That evening, Nadia spread blueprints across the dining table. Together, they traced what could be: sensory corners for children overwhelmed by noise, art rooms where colors spoke when words wouldn't, rows of raised garden beds waiting for small hands to dig. She began reaching out to contacts in her old network, therapists, educators, designers, no longer as the hidden heiress, but as a woman with a vision. Nolan took on the role without fanfare. He repaired benches, measured soil beds, and restored broken doors, always steady and quiet. Nadia began calling him the craftsman of quiet courage. And though the phrase embarrassed him, Benji repeated it with admiration, as if it were a superhero title. Word spread faster than they expected. Neighbors stopped by, curious. A retired teacher offered to run storytelling hours. A local carpenter dropped off lumber. Donations trickled in after Nadia, with trembling hands, posted the idea online. In the evenings, they would sit on the back steps, mugs warm in their hands, watching fireflies spark across the lawn. Benji would chatter about his plans as junior garden guide, plant maps, scavenger hunts, and even secret club rules. Nolan would smile, listening, while Nadia let herself imagine a future where Briar Hollow's halls no longer echoed with silence, but with voices that belonged. The house that once trapped her in grief was opening, room by room, into something living again, not a monument to loss, but a promise of growth. And in that promise, Nadia, Nolan, and Benji found themselves bound together, not by chance anymore, but by choice. The morning of the opening dawned clear, as though even the sky had chosen to bless Briar Hollow. For the first time in years, its iron gate stood wide, cars lined the long drive, and voices carried across the lawn. Neighbors, teachers, families, people curious about the promise of a place called the Center for Growing Things. Nadia stood on the steps of the conservatory, the glass panes polished until they caught the sun like prisms. Her dress was simple, her hands trembling only slightly as she adjusted the papers in her grasp. Nolan stood just behind her, steady as always, and Benji hovered at his side with a hand-drawn badge reading Junior Garden Guide pinned proudly to his shirt. When the murmur quieted, Nadia lifted her gaze to the crowd. Her voice, soft at first, grew stronger with each word. 4 years ago, this house became a grave of memories. I believed I had lost everything worth living for. I locked the doors, pulled the curtains, and waited for time to erase me too. Then one night at 2 a.m, I made a phone call. I meant to reach my therapist. Instead, I dialed the wrong number. She paused, breath catching. But maybe it wasn't wrong because a stranger answered, and he came, and he stayed. Her eyes flicked to Nolan, then back to the gathering. What you see here today, the gardens, the classrooms, this glass house filled with light, it exists because of that call and because of what came after. Briar Hollow will never again be just a monument to loss. From this day forward, it will be a place where children feel safe, where parents find community, where hope can take root. Applause rose, first tentative, then swelling. A retired teacher wiped her eyes. A mother clutched her son's hand. For the people gathered, the words weren't polished like a boardroom speech. They were raw, human, and true. The ribbon was cut, and life spilled into the halls that had once known only silence. Children darted down corridors, their laughter echoing off marble. Parents bent to touch soil in the raised beds, guided by Benji, who took his role with the solemn joy of someone who finally belonged. The grand dining hall filled with chatter, not grief. By dusk, lanterns glowed along the garden paths. The crowd trickled away, leaving the house hushed once more. But it was no longer the hush of emptiness. It was the hush of something sacred, roots settling, bonds forming, a future beginning. Later, under the full glow of the moon, Nolan and Nadia lingered in the conservatory. The glass walls shimmered with reflected light, plants casting soft shadows. Benji had fallen asleep in a chair nearby, badge crooked but still shining. Nadia's voice was quiet but steady. This place feels alive again, and so do I, but only because you didn't treat us like a stop along your road. She looked at him, her eyes clear. You stayed. Nolan reached for her hand, calloused fingers meeting hers. I don't want to be a guest anymore. Not in this house, not in your life. I want this, Benji, you, the garden, all of it, not as something temporary, as home. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full. Nadia squeezed his hand, a single tear slipping free, not of sorrow, but of release. Then let's make that our promise. No more temporary. From tonight forward, this is where we grow together. And in the moonlit conservatory, with the boy they both loved sleeping peacefully beside them, they sealed that promise, not with grand declarations, but with presence. 3 lives, once fractured, now rooted in the same soil, ready to rise like the garden itself. Not visitors, not survivors. A family at last. In the poignant tale of Nolan Reyes, a weary single dad navigating warehouse shifts and his son Benji's nightmares, and Nadia Quinn, a grieving heiress entombed in her decaying mansion after a tragic plane crash, we unearth a profound life lesson. A single act of compassion, even in the dead of night, can shatter isolation and weave fractured souls into a tapestry of healing and family. Nolan's decision to answer a desperate wrong number at 2 a.m., defying logic and risk, to drive through a storm to Nadia's door, reminds us that true courage isn't grand gestures, but showing up for strangers when the world whispers to look away. Nadia's raw vulnerability, confessing her loss in a cold conservatory, mirrors Nolan's quiet endurance as a widower, teaching that grief doesn't define us. It's the hands we extend in the darkness that rebuild us. Together, they transform Briar Hollow from a monument of sorrow into a vibrant community center for growing things, gardens, art, and hope, where Benji's innocent wonder plants seeds of joy. This story stirs the soul, evoking tears for lost loved ones and the loneliness we all carry, urging us to embrace unexpected connections as lifelines. In a fast-paced world of missed calls and guarded hearts, it whispers that vulnerability invites belonging, turning wrong turns into destined paths and proving that family isn't born, but chosen, one brave hello at a time. If this narrative moved you, igniting memories of your own midnight miracles or acts of kindness that altered your path, share your stories in the comments below. What unexpected moment taught you the power of showing up? And don't forget to subscribe for more deeply emotional journeys of resilience, love, and transformation. Your support keeps these heartfelt tales alive, one inspiring connection at a time.